Reading for the Academic World, Level 3. Copyright 2018, Seed Learning, all rights reserved. Language. Unit 1. What, when, and how. Vocabulary learning strategies. 4 specific vocabulary strategies can help make your vocabulary acquisition both efficient and effective. Guessing from context. When we read, we meet unknown words. Instead of immediately consulting a dictionary, use context clues to infer what the meaning of unknown words might be. After guessing, consult the dictionary to confirm the guess or elaborate on it or correct it. Word cards and flashcard programs. Using word cards to learn vocabulary is just one step in learning a word. Using word cards is a deliberate learning strategy and needs to be accompanied by meeting the words in listening and reading, and then trying to use the words in speaking and writing. Try this approach when you meet a useful word that you do not know. 1. Write the word to be learned on one side of a small card and its translation on the other side, or enter the word into a flashcard program. This format encourages your process of recalling the word. Each recall strengthens the connection between the word's form and meaning. 2. In the beginning, start with small packs of cards, about 15 or 20 words. Difficult items should be learned in small groups to allow more repetition and more thoughtful processing. As the learning gets easier, increase the size of the pack. However, don't work with packs that exceed 50 cards. If packs are too large, they become unmanageable, and it is difficult to get through them all in one go. 3. Space the repetitions. The best spacing is to go through the cards a second time a few minutes after first looking at them. Then review them an hour or so later. Then go over them the next day, then a week later, and then after an interval of a couple of weeks. Spaced repetition results in longer-lasting learning. 4. For words which are difficult to learn, use techniques that allow for deeper processing, like the keyword technique. Think of the word in different contexts where it is used. Break the word into word parts if possible. The more associations you can make with an item, the better it will be remembered. 5. Say the word aloud to yourself. This helps the form to enter long-term memory. 6. Write phrases or quotations containing the words on the card too, where this is helpful. This particularly applies to verbs. Some words are most usefully learned in phrases. Using word parts. Around 60% of English words have entered English from French, Latin, or Greek. These languages use prefixes and suffixes and stems, and these components of words occur frequently in English. Here are few examples of the most frequent prefixes in English. Prefix: D, X, miss. Meaning: down, away. Out, beyond. Wrongly. Example words: decline, depress, derive. Exceed, expand, expose. Misinterpret, misspeak, misanalyze. Common prefixes are worth learning because they occur in thousands of English words. When you meet a new word, you should check to see if it has a prefix you already know. Don't use this prefix to guess the meaning, though. Instead, look up the word in a dictionary and then analyze the meaning to see if it contains or could contain the meaning of the prefix. Relating the meaning of the word to the meaning of the prefix it contains will help you retain its meaning. Using a dictionary. A dictionary can be a very useful language learning resource that can help maximize the learning of new words. Here are 4 suggestions for how to use hard copy and electronic dictionaries for learning new words. 1. Look at all the meanings of a word and see if they share some common underlying component. 2. Look at or listen to the pronunciation of the word and say it a few times to yourself. 3. Look at other entries preceding or following a word to see if there are related words that share the same form and meaning. 4. Study the example sentences in the dictionary provided with a word. Implementing these ideas will enhance your knowledge of words and make recalling them easier. Language. Unit 2. Look closer, think again. Word consciousness. Young native speakers of English are capable of increasing their vocabulary size by approximately 1,000 words a year. Prior to starting their first year of school, children may already know 5,000 words or more. However, at any particular age level, the range of the vocabulary sizes of students can be quite variable depending on the life experiences of the children and their skills and interests in reading. Teachers try to encourage the vocabulary growth of young children, especially those who know fewer words than their classmates, by getting them interested and excited about words. This is termed developing word consciousness. Word consciousness involves learners becoming consciously aware of words, their nature, and the jobs they do. This includes becoming aware of word parts, prefixes, suffixes, and stems, and word families, core meanings and the various senses of words, words that have the same spelling or pronunciation but different meanings, finding out more about words by looking in dictionaries and on the internet, developing an awareness of words' histories, and becoming aware of how word choices affect the message of a text. Ultimately, the aim of word consciousness development is to excite an interest in words which overlap subjects and extends to all parts of the day, even outside the classroom and beyond school hours. Here are some examples to illustrate possible word consciousness activities. Word families and prefixes and suffixes. A word family is a group of words which all share the same word stem but have different prefixes and suffixes. For example, here is the word family for hurry, hurry, hurried, hurriedly, hurries, hurrying, unhurried, unhurriedly. Notice how some words have both a prefix and a suffix, and how a word can have more than one suffix. Words can also have more than one prefix, like in unmistaken. There are 2 kinds of word stems, those that are words by themselves without any prefix or suffix, such as hurry, and those that must have a prefix or suffix and cannot be used with the same meaning by themselves, like spect, as in spectacles, inspect, and respect. A useful word family activity, such as the chart shown below, can be easily created by teachers. Words from 4 word families should be randomly listed for students to sort. Key questions can also be used to focus students' attention on the words. What endings, suffixes, do the different family members have? Can members of the same word family have different beginnings, prefixes? Adequate. Adjustable. Cycled. Defeating. Adjustment. Defeatist. Cycle. Readjustments. Cycling. Readjusted. Defeatism. Defeat. Inadequately. Inadequate. Non-adjustable. Cyclical. Concepts across cultures. The vocabulary of the language reflects what is important to users of that language. It can also shape the way they look at the world. Different languages use different frameworks of sound systems, grammar, and vocabulary. Examining English. How many different kinds of bread can you find? Does each have a different name? Do some of these names come to English from other languages? Here are some words in English which came to English from other languages. Why were these words borrowed into English? Sushi, apartment, April, centimeter, chocolate, ski, pizza. Looking at other languages. If you know someone who speaks an Asian language, find out how many words they have for rice. Do they have a different word for rice growing in the field, rice for sale in the supermarket, and cooked rice? Here are some words and phrases used in Japanese which have been borrowed from English. Why were these words borrowed into Japanese? Apato, salaryman, Warudo series. It is good for children to learn that the way one language works is not the same in other languages. This encourages them to look more critically at how words are used and can trigger a more critical examination of language use and the implications of how words can be used to shape people's attitudes towards other people and events. Words in phrases. Native speakers acquire their knowledge of words in phrases through experience with the language, that is, through listening and reading input. Here are some very frequent phrases: each other, last night, at the time, on the other hand, make up your mind. Figuratives are phrases that have two meanings, a literal meaning and a figurative meaning. For example, gave me the green light has the literal meaning of being shown a green light. Its figurative meaning is getting permission to do something. Part of the fun in learning figurative expressions is learning where they came from.
History. Unit 3. A Girl with a Vision. The Maid of Orleans. In the long wars between the French and English, no prince or king gained as much fame as did the young French peasant girl Joan of Arc. She was born in the little village of Domremy. Her father had often told her of the sad condition of France, how much of the French domain was largely in the possession of England, and how the French king dared not be crowned. Thus, Joan came to pity the state in which her country existed. She worried so much over the matter that in time she began to have visions of angels and heard strange voices whispering explicit instructions. The voices said to her, "Joan, you can deliver the land from the English. Go to the aid of King Charles." At last, these strange visions and voices made the young girl believe that she had a mission from God, and she determined to try to save France. When she told her father and mother of her purpose, they tried to persuade her that the visions of angels and the voices were only dreams. The village priest, her young friends, and even the governor of the town all tried to stop her, to no avail. Then, little by little, people began to believe in the girl's mission. Some who were wealthy helped finance her journey to the town of Chinon, where the French king, Charles VII, was living. When Joan arrived at Chinon, an assembly of French soldiers was preparing to go to the south of France to relieve the city of Orleans, which the English were attacking. Despite her sex and young age, King Charles received Joan kindly and listened to what she had to say with deep attention. The girl spoke modestly, but with a calm belief that she was right. "My king," she said, "my name is Joan. God has sent me to deliver France from her enemies. You shall shortly be crowned at Rheims. I am to lead the soldiers you are about to send to the aid of Orleans. Such is my commission from God. victory will be granted to them. The king and his nobles talked the matter over and consented to allow Joan to lead an army of about 5,000 men against the English at Orleans. When she left Chinon at the head of her soldiers in April 1429, she was hardly a mature figure. Joan was only 18 at the time. Riding on a fine war horse and suited in white armor from head to foot, she rode along past the cheering crowds. In one hand, she carried an ancient sword that she had found near the tomb of a saint, and in the other, a large white flag with an image of white flowers on it. As she spoke about her visions, Joan invoked courage and faith in the army that accompanied her. When Joan arrived at the city of Orleans, she bravely rode around its walls while the English soldiers looked on in astonishment. She entered Orleans despite the efforts of the English to prevent her. She stirred up the city by her cheerful, confident words, and then led her soldiers out to do battle with the English. Their success was surprising to all. In battle after battle, the English forces fell to Joan and the French army behind her. In the end, the English army was forced away from the city. The city of Orleans was saved. The French soldiers celebrated the great military victory and called Joan the Maid of Orleans. Her fame spread everywhere, and the English, as well as the French, thought she had more than human power. Joan led the French in several successive battles, and again her soldiers were victorious. At last, the English were driven to the far northern region of France. Then Charles, urged by Joan, went to Reims with 12,000 soldiers, and there, with splendid ceremonies, the French king was crowned. Joan held her white flag and stood near Charles during the ceremony. Joan reported to King Charles that she no longer heard voices and requested to return to her family. However, the king pressed her to continue fighting until the English were driven from France. The girl submitted to the king's request and took part in an attack upon the army of the Duke of Burgundy. It was in this battle that Joan was taken prisoner. For a large sum of money, the Duke delivered her into the hands of the English, who put her in prison in Rouen. Joan remained in prison for a year before finally being charged as a practitioner of magic and brought to trial. It was said that she was under the influence of the evil one. Her trial was long and difficult. At its close, she was sentenced to be burned as a witch. A statue of her now stands on the spot where she suffered her final fate at the hands of the British. History. Unit 4. South American Empires. The Empire of the Incas. Imagine dancing while your legs are being struck, then having to race up and down a mountain, and doing this 21 days in a row. And as a reward for succeeding in this, holes are cut in the bottom of your ears. Then a pair of metal blocks is put in the holes. If you were an Incan boy, this would be a moment of pride. This ceremony and your new large pair of earrings showed that you were now tough enough to be a man. You were now ready to be part of the great Incan Empire. The Incas ruled over much of the continent of South America. This empire was the dominant force in the region for over 300 years. At its height, in the 15th century, it included over 9 million people and had an area of over 2 million kilometers squared. This is all the more amazing considering that the Incas never invented the wheel, did not have iron tools, and did not even have a written language. The Incan Empire was sandwiched between the Amazon jungle and the Andes Mountains, all along the continent of South America. Most of the Incan Empire was located high in the mountains with less than adequate land for growing crops. To be able to eke out an existence in such conditions, the Incans had to be tough and hard-working. Even children as young as 2 years old were expected to be able to contribute by doing household chores. Incan society was hierarchical. At the top were the emperor and the royal family, with the government coming mainly from high-level families. Next were the lower-level government workers, the people who collected the taxes and kept records. At the bottom were the commoners. Commoners either farmed to provide food for the empire or made items such as jewelry or weapons. The foundation of the Incan Empire was its government. It had a strong central administration which controlled much of its citizens' lives. Each person was expected to contribute to society. This government told its citizens when and where to work. To be at home during your scheduled work time, especially if you were a commoner, was considered a crime. Government officers went around to each house to check that each worker was where they should be. The Incan Empire was often involved in conflict with its neighbors. Because of its lack of adequate land for crops, the Incan Empire was constantly in expansion to get access to more food and resources. All Incan males were considered to be part of the army, and any Incan boy who had passed the ceremony to be a man could be called up to fight at any time. Thus, a large number of soldiers were always available and ready for battle in the empire's standing army. Besides controlling the roles of its citizens, the Incan Empire also set up infrastructure to better connect its empire. Although the Incans did not use any wheeled vehicles, the Incan government created a huge system of roads, over 40,000 kilometers of them. These roads were solely for the transport of food and armies. Commoners were not allowed to use the roads. Only those on official government business were allowed to set foot on them. The control of its citizens and its system of transport unified the Incan Empire while making it very efficient. It was able to survive and expand by being able to get maximum use from what land for farms it had, and then transport any food grown through its empire. In the same way, soldiers could be gathered and sent quickly into battle, allowing the Incas to be successful in war. In maintaining this control of its society, the Incan Empire had a very rigid view of crime. In addition, punishments for crime were extreme. Many crimes were punishable by death. And if someone was caught in a crime, the enforcement of punishment was often immediate. For example, any commoner a government officer caught using the roads would be immediately thrown off the mountain to their death. The Incan Empire was able to survive and expand for more than 300 years. The end of the Incan Empire came about in the mid-16th century after contact with the Spanish. The Spanish brought smallpox, a disease that the Incas had no resistance to. The Spanish also had much better quality weapons since they had the technology to make iron. Conflict with the Spanish and death due to disease took a huge toll on the Incan civilization. The Spanish had control of all the Incan lands by 1572.
Ecology. Unit 5. The study of the seasons. As spring comes early. The timing of many natural events depends on seasonal changes. Birds time the building of their nests as seasons change in order that their eggs will hatch when insects are available to feed their young. Likewise, insects make their appearance each year concurrently with the leafing out of the plants that they feed upon. Researchers who study the relationships between climate changes and the life cycle events of plants and animals work in the field of phenology. Natural events like the leafing or flowering of plants and bird migrations are among the environmental responses most sensitive to climate change. Around the world, many such events that parallel the onset of different seasons are occurring earlier than in the past. This has led to natural mismatches in some regions where plant and animal species are not changing at the same rate as the seasons. In an effort to better understand recent changes in nature, researchers in the field of phenology have been pooling data collected in national parks across North America. Analysis of the data collected since the early 1900s has allowed researchers to identify key signs across parks to track the beginning of different seasons. What kind of natural variables could be used as an index of the onset of spring? One indicator of the end of winter is the appearance of certain flowers on plants such as lilacs and honeysuckle. Yearly dates recorded for the first appearance of leaves on these plants and then the first flowers are used to infer spring's onset. And according to the analysis of the above-mentioned spring indices, it appears that the onset of spring in recent decades has occurred earlier than a century ago. Effects of spring's early arrival include the displacement of native species in parks and the limiting of food sources for migrating species. In cases where invasive species now exist in parks, an early spring can give these species a jump on growth. As invasive plants leaf out quickly, they tend to crowd out or inhibit the growth of native species. Likewise, insects and animals may face problems when seasons change unpredictably. Plants may have the most flowers on them before the natural migration period of birds or butterflies through a national park. Thus, the animals that feed on and pollinate such plants will have trouble locating food sources. Additionally, there are other park management issues related to the early onset of the spring season. Annual park events may become difficult to plan when seasonal patterns become unpredictable. For example, the annual Cherry Blossom Festival on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. is a popular event that attracts visitors from across the U.S. Cherry trees naturally have flowers for only a short time. Full flowering for these trees is usually reached within about 1 week after the opening of the first flowers. 1 week later, the flowering of these trees is over. When an early spring makes presumptions regarding the date of first flowering incorrect, the best time for viewing trees at the festival will be missed. Both those planning and attending the event wind up disappointed. Scheduling work by park managers at Acadia National Park in Maine has also become problematic with the shift in the beginning of spring. The park typically gets college students to work during the winter break as manual laborers. These students are paid a small fee to serve as assistants helping with weed control in the park. However, as spring comes earlier, the best time for starting weed control measures shifts to a time when college students are still in classes. Thus, the park misses out on the opportunity to hire students. New ways of carrying out weed control measures must be found. Problems such as the above are making federal agencies and researchers take a greater interest in phenology. Exploitation of all of the data available from national parks has led to the development of useful products now available to park managers. Maps based on the spring indices for North America include predicted dates of the arrival of spring across the continent within a range of 6 days. Information is also available regarding how the predicted dates for spring each year compared to the average date marked as the beginning of spring according to the previous 30 years of data. One of the researchers involved in the study of spring indices for national parks is Alyssa Rosemartin of the University of Arizona. According to Rosemartin, we are just beginning to understand the many implications of earlier springs. She emphasizes the importance of every person's participation in observing and recording spring indicators seen in parks across North America. Rosemartin explains, "We hope that people will join us in documenting changes in their area through participation in Nature's Notebook. Nature's Notebook is an online program where amateur and professional naturalists record observations of plants and animals throughout the year. These recorded observations will be used to create long-term data sets used for scientific analysis. Ecology. Unit 6. Global Warming and the Environment. The global issue of climate change. Although there may be debate as to specifics, there is no doubt the last few decades have shown increasing changes in our climate. In the past, countries and their citizens were mainly concerned with environmental problems at a local level. Policies and programs were all at the domestic level. However, with the widespread impact of global warming on our environment, concern and policy making have reached a global level. There have been international conferences to discuss ways to lessen our contribution to climate change. High-level meetings, such as the one in Kyoto in the late 1990s, led to an international agreement between over 190 countries. Countries signing this agreement guaranteed that they would reduce their levels of pollution. The aim was to work in global partnership to lower man-made pollution of our shared environment. It has proven difficult, however, to maintain this global agreement. Some of the countries who signed, like Sweden and Australia, for example, passed legislation requiring their domestic industries to reduce pollution. In this way, they were better able to regulate CO2 emissions in particular. Unfortunately, other countries, like Canada and Russia, later became reluctant to guarantee limits to their pollutants. These countries ended their commitment to the agreement, stating economic reasons. They felt the limits would negatively impact their domestic industries and national economies. There are now large amounts of scientific data showing the rapid negative changes to the Earth's ecosystem and our connection to it. However, notwithstanding this scientific evidence, it has thus far proved impossible to find straightforward guidelines that all countries will agree to adopt. With each passing year, the need for global action and intervention becomes clearer. From increased extreme weather and flooding to the failing of many plant and animal species, nothing is unaffected. One case in particular where environmental impact is most obviously seen is in the Great Barrier Reef around Australia. The Great Barrier Reef is a collection of coral reefs that stretches over 2,300 kilometers. This living underwater ecosystem provides a home to hundreds of species of different kinds of other water animals, fish, and birds. Unfortunately, the Great Barrier Reef, like all coral reefs, is sensitive to changes in water temperature. Thus, the increased ocean temperatures that are part of global warming have seriously impacted the Great Barrier Reef. Coral reefs are delicate systems. They contain tiny living organisms within them, a kind of algae. These organisms not only give the corals their different beautiful colors, but also help create a living underwater ecosystem. These algae produce food which they pass on to the coral. This, in turn, allows the coral to grow and spread, providing homes and food for other water animals. Unfortunately, increases in temperature cause coral reefs to kick out the algae from their structures. This disrupts the entire ecosystem and results in a loss of color in the corals. Any non-living coral becomes a washed-out white in color. If not given the chance to recover, the damage could become permanent. A recent scientific survey found that fully 2/3 of the Great Barrier Reef has now changed to this washed-out white color. The Great Barrier Reef is in danger, and it serves as a symbol of the damage climate change is doing to our environment. Much like trees, coral reefs put down rings as they grow, and like trees, the age of a coral reef can be estimated by the number of rings they have made. According to the rings of the Great Barrier Reef, it first started growing over 20,000 years ago. It would be to our shame if man-made pollution contributed to the end of a 20,000-year-old piece of biological history. Without acknowledging the seriousness of the situation and reducing the output of our pollution levels, the increase to global warming makes this outcome likely. Luckily, however, the condition of the Great Barrier Reef is drawing attention toward the problems we need to face globally. With more media attention, public awareness can be raised, and pressure can be applied to governments of countries not currently limiting pollutants. And as the general public, we can make demands of our governments. We can demand that lower limits be put on pollutant levels. We can ask that more money is put into research of clean energy. If everyone gets involved, surely a way forward can be found that benefits all of us on Earth.
Psychology. Unit 7. What we remember, what we forget. Memory and brain training. Attending an event, meeting a new person, gaining new knowledge or a skill. These are all examples of times when the brain must determine whether to save information or not. If the brain decides that a piece of information is important enough to save, it will store or file the information, and it becomes part of a person's memory to be available for recall at a later time. Memory is the aggregate of events and information that the brain gathers from the time a baby is born. With each experience, the brain will continue to accumulate and store information, build on previous information, and retrieve information. This is why memory is so important. It is an essential part of a person's identity. Just imagine if you couldn't remember your name or where your house was. The first type of memory is short-term memory, which is the ability to keep a small amount of information in the mind. This information is able to be used for only a short time. A student who tries to memorize a list of dates, equations, or vocabulary items for a test will probably only have the information studied in that review session for a very short time. Most likely, the information will be gone before or shortly after the test. You may have experienced limits of short-term memory when you have forgotten an individual's name after meeting him or her for the first time. Unless you meet the person again or a name tag provides a reminder of the person's name, it will be easy to lose that piece of information in short-term memory. Or perhaps you have experienced going to the store and forgetting what to buy. Unless a grocery list is written down, it is easy to forget to buy some items that you needed. The duration of short-term memory is finite. However, if the information is repeated over again, it will be stored for a longer period of time in a different kind of memory. The second type of memory is long-term memory. Whereas short-term memory only lasts a short time, long-term memory can last an indefinite amount of time. However, within long-term memory exist stronger memories that can be recalled on demand or weaker memories that can be recalled only upon prompting or reminding. Long-term memory can include memories of an experience or an event. For example, a child may remember a fun family vacation at the beach. Long-term memory can also include learned skills, such as walking or riding a bike, that a person knows how to do without much conscious thought. Memory, or the brain's ability to store and recall information at a given time, is not perfect. Most people have experienced forgetting the answer on a test before. People who like to multitask also tend to forget things more readily. In addition, as people get older, memory capabilities start to decline, and it can become harder to store and recall information. Furthermore, brain damage or medical diseases can cause memory problems. In extreme circumstances, people can lose their memory completely. Nevertheless, there are ways to teach the brain how to remember better and reach its maximum potential via memory techniques. One way to improve memory, other than repetition, is to involve the senses in an experience: seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and touching. The more senses that are involved in an experience, the better the brain is able to recall the experience. For example, if a student reads a book while listening to the audio version of that book at the same time, the brain will better understand and recall the contents of that particular book. Another way to improve memory is to use mnemonic devices. These are memory techniques one uses to help remember information. One type of mnemonic is called a music mnemonic, wherein words are put to a song. An example of a popular music mnemonic is the alphabet song, in which the letters of the alphabet are sung to help children remember the letter names as well as the order of the letters. Another type of mnemonic is a name mnemonic. For example, knowing Holmes helps to remember the name of the U.S. Great Lakes, because each lake starts with one of the letters in Holmes: Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. One of the best ways to improve one's memory is to take care of the brain. Studies have shown that exercising regularly, sleeping well, and eating a balanced diet all play an important role in the quality of a person's memory. Psychology. Unit 8. What's so funny? The village that couldn't stop laughing. Everyone knows that laughter can be contagious and that it would be impossible to go an entire day without hearing someone laugh. There are some people who have such a happy-sounding laugh that it is difficult for others to keep from laughing with them. It is even possible to laugh so hard and long that it hurts, though the pain is usually only temporary. However, imagine beginning to laugh and not being able to stop. This very thing happened to a small village in Africa, and no one could have anticipated that it would eventually infect many others around the country and in surrounding nations. The Tanganyika laughing epidemic began on January 30th, 1962, in a mission-run boarding school in what is now a country called Tanzania. 3 young girls in the small village of Kashasha began laughing one morning during class. The teacher attempted to get them to stop but was unsuccessful, so she then took all of the girls in her class to a small field beside the school to try to calm the laughing girls down. However, this had the opposite effect, because the girls who looked at the 3 hysterical girls also began to laugh. The laughter was amusing at first, albeit not for very long. The students were soon laughing so hard they cried because they could not breathe. Many girls laughed until their throats hurt and they collapsed. Throughout the day, the laughter diminished a bit, only to commence yet again. Laughter spread throughout the school, affecting 95 of the 159 students. To outsiders, it looked like a practical joke gone wrong. Symptoms of the epidemic included laughter, crying fits, and restlessness. At times, there was a temporary respite, but then the laughing fits would return. The longest duration of uncontrollable laughter lasted 16 days. During one person's laughing fit, it usually overcame yet another person, which passed on the epidemic. In March, the school was forced to close down, and the students, all teenage girls, were sent home, taking the laughing epidemic with them. The outbreak then reached another school in the village of Nchamba, which had 10,000 residents. There were 217 school-aged children infected from March 16th until April 30th. As the year progressed, several other villages were affected. In June, the epidemic hit another middle school, with the outbreak affecting 98 to 154 students and lasting 8 days. The government was forced to close villages by quarantine in order to protect adjacent villages that had not yet been affected. By the end of 1964, over 1,000 people had been infected with fits of uncontrollable laughter, all of which was without humor. 2 health officers covered the epidemic over the course of the year and noted that though laughter is often seen as a sign of happiness, it had become a terrible disease among their people. They could find no patterns of how the epidemic spread. Extensive testing of both the food and school where the epidemic began failed to reveal any chemicals or viruses in the environment that might coincide with a trigger for the problem. Of note, they did find that the epidemic influenced mostly girls, who then spread the laughter to other women in their families. Adult men were immune, though young boys also contracted the problem. In addition, it appeared to commonly affect members of a lower social and economic class. The laughing epidemic appears to be yet another case of mass hysteria that overcame hundreds of people. People under high amounts of stress are more likely to fall victim to devastating social influences. In the 1800s, Tanganyika had been a British colony. During World War II, it was under German rule, only to fall back under Britain after the war had ended. This persistent stressor within the nation, such as rule by another nation, may have contributed to the outbreak. The main theory for those affected is that the girls initially affected may have been uncomfortable with the European-led schools they attended. Specifically, they were attending a boarding school that taught under a rigid educational system quite different from their ethnic background. The young girls were living with strangers who preached Christianity, a religion very different from their tribal beliefs. They were also away from their villages and families, often for the very first time. About 18 months after it started, the epidemic died out without explanation. Researchers still cannot explain exactly what brought it on, nor why it disappeared. What they do know is that the country was under a range of extreme stressors at the time of the outbreak. Perhaps it is a combination of underlying events that led to the laughing epidemic.
Literature. Unit 9. The Works of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's Tragic Plays. All of Shakespeare's plays are worthy of note given the fact that his plays, written in the 16th and 17th centuries, have been translated into over 80 languages and are still performed on stages around the world. If asked to name a Shakespearean play, most people would name a tragedy. These are perhaps the most famous of all of Shakespeare's plays and writings. Most likely, people were drawn to tragedies for several reasons. First, Shakespeare's tragedies included universal themes such as love, hate, jealousy, evil, life, and death, all of which were as relevant to the audience in Shakespeare's time as they are today. Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is a timeless story of forbidden love. The young lovers at the center of the story are from families who had an ongoing conflict affecting the whole city that they lived in. The story has elements that everyone then and now can relate to. For example, many people have experienced love that was prohibited due to some form of difference, such as age, culture, race, or social class. Thus, many people can relate to the ache of forbidden love left unsatisfied because of the pressure to conform to someone else's expectations or standards. Another powerful element in Romeo and Juliet is exemplified when Romeo and Juliet themselves experience the mutual loss of the other through tragic misunderstandings and then death. The themes in Romeo and Juliet are so universal and powerful that the story has been made into a ballet and a movie and has been adapted many times in book form due to its popularity among audiences. Many of Shakespeare's tragedies center around a character who is usually a so-called hero with a tragic flaw. Audiences are fascinated by the stories of these heroes, whom Shakespeare so expertly portrays as humans who have, just like anyone else, complex thoughts and feelings, as well as positive and negative characteristics. Hamlet, both the main character and the title of another one of Shakespeare's tragedies, fits the typical frame of a tragic hero. He is the Prince of Denmark. He is a deep and philosophical thinker. However, he lacks commitment to a strong course of action when it is required of him. When Hamlet's uncle kills his father, marries his mother, and becomes the King of Denmark, a ghost tasks Hamlet with taking revenge against his uncle. Though Hamlet's uncle is eventually killed in the end, many others, including Hamlet himself, are also killed in the process due to Hamlet's tragic flaw, which was the failure to take decisive action at the opportune moment. Similarly, the hero and title character Macbeth, a successful soldier under King Duncan, has a tragic flaw. One day, 3 witches come to him to inform him that he will be the next king. Macbeth is willing to wait for this wonderful prospect to become reality in due time. However, at his wife's urging, impatience and ambition overtake Macbeth. When King Duncan chooses his son Malcolm to be the next king, Macbeth is reluctant to remain passive in waiting for his promised future title. Macbeth's assessment of the situation is that his only option to alter the course of events and become king is to take matters into his own hands. The witches appear a second time to tell Macbeth what events will take place in the future, but Macbeth's thoughts are clouded by his ambition to become king. This tragic flaw in Macbeth's character is what leads to his inevitable downfall and eventual death. In addition to their memorable characters, Shakespeare's tragedies are wonderfully dramatic in nature, especially when compared to other tragedies written during his time. The plots are complex and full of suspense, with the height of conflict reaching its peak at the climax. In Greek tragedies, the hero does not necessarily die at the conclusion. Conversely, Shakespeare had no issue with killing characters in his plays through one means or another. Almost all of the tragedies include scenes with characters fighting one another with swords. In fact, in Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Macbeth, all of the main characters die by the end of the play. Whether by poison, suicide, beheading, drowning, or hanging, violent deaths are almost expected in a Shakespearean tragedy. It is amazing that 400 years after they were written, many of Shakespeare's plays are still enjoyed for their universal themes and sophisticated use of language. However, it is the tragedies, with their dramatic portrayal of human emotions and behaviors, that continue to have an impact on audiences around the world. Literature. Unit 10. Literature Then and Now. What is literature? Literature is a fundamental part of our culture and society, yet it is difficult to say what exactly literature is. Literature is a broad term that seems to cover many different types of writing. By convention, we consider poetry, plays, novels, short stories, and essays as literature. However, there are many kinds of written works that are excluded from this list. For example, cookbooks or travel books, to name but 2 exceptions, are generally not considered literature. Although this may seem arbitrary on the surface, it is because what defines literature is somewhat abstract. Literature is defined as well-written works, those considered of superior or of lasting artistic merit. Unfortunately, there are no comprehensive or objective set of parameters for deciding what a superior or artistic work is. As well, the view of what is considered literature changes over time. The idea of literature has developed organically over time. Before human civilizations had written language, humans communicated only through using words or songs. The spoken word was the main source of information and entertainment. Stories and songs at this time mainly concerned the activities of the gods or ideas on how the world was created. Myths helped people make sense of the world, but as time went on, humans, in the form of heroes, also came to be featured as the main characters in epic poems. Similar to songs, ancient stories were told in a metered and dramatic way. As different civilized groups developed written forms of their own languages, the first works of literature were produced. These were retellings of the tales and legends that had been passed down through generations, told and retold in poetic meter. The first writers then wrote down these stories in the same poetic meter they had heard repeated over their lives. Thus, the earliest forms of literature were poetry and plays. Some of these first pieces of literature date back to 2000 BC. Much of the early literature in those ancient times, those tales of gods and heroes, was not thought of as myths. In fact, all these stories were considered true and sacred. The idea of a fictional story, such as commonly written these days, would not have occurred to a person of ancient times. Most written works were for the purpose of transmission of knowledge, whether they were instructional or religious texts. Epic tales were considered to be historical events. As well, originality was not something expected. In fact, early writers would stress that the works they had written were actually previous stories or translations of early stories, in spite of any new information that was incorporated into the story. Inevitably, writers began to alter the legends and religious stories, complementing existing versions with their own elements. Listeners or audiences did not become aware of this until well into the Middle Ages. In about the 12th century, some incredible written stories about Alexander the Great were released. Alexander the Great was a famous king who lived from 356 to 323 BC. Although he was only 32 when he died, during his life he accomplished many amazing things and ended up creating one of the largest empires of the ancient world. His empire stretched from Europe in the west to India in the east and down to Egypt in the south. At the time of his death, he had been crowned the king of Macedonia, the king of Persia, the king of Asia, and the pharaoh of Egypt. Not surprisingly, his life was a good source of stories. Writers could not help but add their own fictional touches to his legend, even hundreds of years later. The most extreme examples of this had Alexander flying something equivalent to a modern airplane or sailing underwater boats. After reading these stories, with these completely impossible scenarios, people eventually realized that these stories of Alexander were false. A paradigm for fictional writing thus became realized. From that point, the idea of what could be written about changed dramatically. Many different kinds of writing emerged, and this has added to our idea of literature. If one goes into any bookstore today, a wide variety of written works can be found for purchase in many different genres. And as writers explore new forms of writing, so too the idea of what is considered literature continues to change. The development of literature is an ongoing process. It continues to evolve and take on new dimensions. At present, even performances like ballet, performances with no written words at all, are beginning to be considered a form of literature. Many ballets were initially inspired by written works and are clearly of artistic merit. Who knows what forthcoming forms of literature may emerge in the future?
Medicine, Unit 11. Medical disasters. Pandemics. Have you seen World War Z or perhaps 28 Days Later? Both of these movies, and many others like them, feature the idea of a worldwide medical disaster. These movies highlight our fears of catching a deadly disease we cannot fight, and the disease is able to quickly spread all over the world. The idea is not without precedents. Throughout history, there have been instances of this. One of the best known of these historical events was the Black Death. This disease, which affected the world in the 1300s, was one of the worst medical disasters in recorded history. It started in China, traveled across northern Asia, and then spread to Europe. By the time the Black Death had stopped spreading, 1 in 3 Europeans had been killed, and 1 in 12 people across the globe had been taken by the disease. In total, over 50 million people died. When a disease like this spreads so rapidly and kills so many people, it is called a pandemic. So, what makes for a pandemic? Would it be easy for one to happen today? There are a few different factors that need to come together for a pandemic to occur. First, in order for a virus or bacteria to cause a pandemic, it must be a relatively new version of that entity. If this is the case, it means that people as a whole have had little exposure to it and thus will not have any biological protection against it. The disease will not be easily recognized and rejected by our bodies. The disease, usually a virus or bacteria, forces entrance into some of the cells of the body. The virus or bacteria then uses these cells to replicate itself. A virus initiates this process by inserting its genetic code into the cells. This code then becomes briefly part of the cell's genetic sequence. The virus uses the cell to produce new viruses. A bacterium may initiate an analogous process, though by more indirect means. The end result is the same. New viruses or bacteria are produced within the cell. Eventually, there are too many entities for the host cell to contain, and the cell breaks open, thus freeing these new viruses or bacteria to infect other cells. For a virus or bacteria to cause a pandemic, there must be an easy mode of transmission from person to person. The most infectious organisms tend to infect the nose and lungs. This is because the mechanisms of the body's responses in those affected areas, coughing and sneezing, actually help to transmit the disease. The viral or bacterial entities are spread in the air and are easily passed on to successive victims. Besides being infectious, for a virus to truly start a pandemic, it must have a sustainable rate of infection. This is the third factor that contributes to a pandemic. That is, an infection must be both very easy to pass on and also not immediately deadly. A virus or bacteria cannot kill its host too quickly. If people start to die before the virus can spread, the pandemic will collapse. The scope of the pandemic in the 14th century was devastating because it satisfied the above necessary requirements. The version of the disease was a new subtype that most people were not resistant to. The Black Death was also highly infectious, spreading by air through coughs and sneezes, not actually by fleas and rats as was previously thought, and the victims died about 10 days after catching the disease, allowing it to sustain its spread. What is the possibility of another pandemic? Some scientists think we may be set for another one soon. However, rather than another occurrence of the Black Death, which was caused by a type of bacteria, scientists are more worried about a pandemic featuring the flu virus. While most types of the flu virus are not life-threatening, occasionally 2 different types can combine to form a deadlier variety. Modern technology and the ease of transportation, those things that allow us to quickly travel within countries or across borders, are also tailor-made to help transmit a disease worldwide. In fact, there was a global flu outbreak less than 20 years ago. It started in Hong Kong and quickly spread in a matter of days to almost 30 countries. This flu was able to spread so quickly due to how common air travel is. People caught it in one country and then flew home to their own, thus spreading the flu worldwide. Luckily, however, this version of the flu has less intrinsic deadliness than the Black Death. The immediate international response of medical professionals working beside each other offset the spread and quick transmission of the disease. Thus, there were luckily very few deaths. You may be concerned at the prospect of a future pandemic. However, the technology which aids the transmission of disease also allows us to prevent or fight pandemics more effectively. The flu outbreak of 20 years ago was able to be contained solely because of quick international cooperation and coordination in emergency measures. Medicine, Unit 12. Apps for Better Health. The good, the bad, the medical app. Technology and healthcare often go hand in hand. With better technology, doctors are able to provide better healthcare. For example, the technical instruments and tools they use are more advanced today than even just a few years ago. Doctors can also see inside our bodies in more detail through the use of better computer programs. Mobile healthcare is now another way technology is impacting the health field. The big question is this: are medical apps a good or bad trend? Generally, it depends on the quality and purpose of the app. The good. Some apps are very useful in that they create a convenient way to manage one's healthcare. One example of a popular app used by clinics and doctors' offices is MyChart. This is a very useful app because a user can make and cancel appointments, as well as keep track of medicines he or she is taking. Users can also view records of office visits, lab reports, and shots they have received. This allows the user to access, view, and manage all of their medical information in one place without having to request it from the doctor's office. Other apps are useful in that they can help users keep records of health issues or send reminders. For instance, Round Health reminds users when to take medicine. MyFitnessPal is a health app with which users can keep track of their weight loss goals, their daily diet, and their exercise. The bad. Some apps are plain bad and, in some cases, dangerous. For example, certain apps claim to measure one's blood pressure. Such apps say that they can analyze and provide statistics on one's blood pressure. Some even have the ability to send the data to one's doctor. It sounds like a good idea, but the problem lies in the claim to measure one's blood pressure using a smartphone. There is no good evidence to date for these apps' utility or accuracy. The app developers also cannot back up their claims with empirical research. Furthermore, such apps have not been approved by any kind of official health ministry as an adequate replacement for a blood pressure monitor. Another app that makes similar claims is the fever measuring thermometer that states it can roughly measure your temperature by placing your finger on a scanner within the app. However, it is not accurate. Not only are some medical apps inaccurate, but a number of studies done on different apps have shown that they fail to check users well enough. For instance, the results of a study done on skin cancer detection apps revealed that such apps cannot spot all types of skin cancer. In many cases, skin cancer that was present was missed by the app. The plain and simple conclusion seems to be that a smartphone just does not have the capacity to do what these apps claim. Smartphones are not able to act as a medical device that has gone through rigid testing by a national healthy ministry. At the very best, these apps can only provide a close estimate. However, since anyone can make an app for smartphone users, it is not always easy for users to determine the integrity of the app. The questionable. Some apps can be helpful. However, the value of the app depends on how the user uses it. For example, WebMD is a popular app. It is one of the leading sources of medical information and health news. It is also considered to be a trustworthy source. However, programs within the app, such as Symptom Checker, can be the cause of problems. It allows a user to choose parts of the body that are hurting, select symptoms, and then review a list of various issues or diseases that match the provided input. Notwithstanding the objective to only provide information, many people have misused the app to self-diagnose. This can cause unnecessary worry in the case that a person believes he or she has a serious disease that is not actually there. On the other hand, it can also provide unwarranted comfort when a person thinks he or she is fine or well on the way to recovery, when in fact there is a serious issue. Therefore, it is really up to the user's discretion as to how much to trust or not a given app. Though the use of medical apps can enhance one's healthcare management in some ways, apps should not be the only source for medical information, diagnosis, and treatment. Furthermore, at this point, medical apps should never replace an actual medical device. It should be remembered that there is no substitution for an in-person visit with a qualified doctor or medical practitioner.
Art. Unit 13. Artist and Activist. War and Poverty, The Art of Kathy Kollwitz. Kathy Kollwitz has become known as one of Germany's most significant artists of the 20th century. Her most famous works represented the effects of poverty, lack of food, and war on the working class and the poor. She stands apart from other modern artists in the sphere of expressionism due to the content of her work and the medium she used, printmaking. Unlike many great artists of her time, she was inspired by the lives of the people around her, rather than directly by other artists. Her art was a criticism of the very social conditions in which she lived. Kathy Schmidt Kollwitz was raised among the middle class. Her parents were socialist yet religious, and she was greatly influenced by her father and grandfather. Her grandfather was a Lutheran pastor who shared his view of the world with her in an important way. The way in which this worldview influenced how she saw her subjects would become clear in her art. Her father, a house builder, was a strong supporter of socialism. He recognized her talent in art while she was still young and placed her in art lessons at 12 years of age. By the age of 16, she was drawing pictures of the workers and peasants that visited her father's office. There were no colleges for women in the late 1800s, which was a great disappointment to Kollwitz. However, she was able to get into an art school specifically for women in Berlin. In 1888, she took classes at the Women's Art School in Munich and realized that her strength was not in painting, but rather as a drafter. In 1891, she married a doctor who worked in a poor working-class area of Berlin. From that time forward, she focused on graphic art, which allowed her to reach more people. Kollwitz's work made her an advocate for poor mothers, their sickly children, and the suffering of those in her husband's care. Her first major works were images of a weaver's rebellion in 1844. Most critics viewed The Weavers as an accurate visual account, telling a sad story of oppression and poverty. However, the German Kaiser determined that Kollwitz would be denied a gold medal in art because her work was too depressing, dark, ugly, and predominantly political. Kollwitz began printing artwork which featured a more naturalistic style in the late 19th century. Her work during the early 1900s was about the Peasants' War, which had taken place in southern Germany from 1524 to 25. It was in this series that she went against tradition and found her political inspiration, Black Anna, an important female revolutionary who was symbolic of anger at oppression. Kollwitz fought to be the voice of the voiceless for the women she drew. She drew a comparison through her art between the contemporary worker in Germany and weak peasants of the past who were oppressed by forced labor and high taxes. It was also during this phase that Kollwitz learned how to sculpt at Académie Julienne while on a visit to Paris. She later evolved to a more expressionistic style. It was not until the death of her son during World War I that Kollwitz truly began to develop her oeuvre, which focused on the exploration of her own suffering and loss. During the 1920s, she created a number of pieces in wood to express her belief in peace, her anger, and her own depression. Her works at this time included The Sacrifice, The Widow Won, and Mothers, to name a few. Her most famous posters were Germany's Children Starving, Bread, and Never Again War. With these works, Kollwitz was honored as the first woman to be accepted into the Prussian Academy of Arts. She received a studio, funds for continuing her work, and a position as a professor. When the Nazi Party came to power in 1933, her work was removed from museums. She was forced to leave the academy, and she was later even barred from exhibiting her work. Kollwitz and her husband were threatened by the Gestapo with arrest and confinement in a concentration camp due to the revolutionary nature of her work. During this time, she lost her grandson to the war and later her husband. Kollwitz's hardship was then compounded as she was forced to leave her home in 1942 due to Allied bombing. Most of her work was destroyed in the final years of the war. Shortly before her death in 1945, Kollwitz wrote letters about the differences between the two world wars, speaking of the poor distinction between military and non-military deaths during World War II. Unfortunately, she died 2 weeks before World War II ended, having lived most of her adult life under the very fear of that which she chose to represent with her art. Art. Unit 14. A Question of Art. Graffiti worthy of galleries. Walk around any big city and you may see writing or paintings on public surfaces. Referred to as graffiti, there is some debate as to whether this is a form of art or a kind of crime. But interestingly, the concept of graffiti is an ancient one. The word graffiti originally came from the Old Greek word graphein, which means to write. Graffiti has been in existence since ancient Roman and Egyptian times. In those times, designs and words were scratched into walls. They were related to the thoughts and concerns of the general public. For instance, some of the graffiti was done by merchants for advertisement. Other types of graffiti included love poems, political slogans, and even magic spells. Despite years of erosion by wind and rain, this ancient graffiti can still be seen on old ruins around the world. However, the modern idea of graffiti has very different implications, and these started in the early 1970s. At this time, some years after World War II, differences in economic and social levels had widened. Those of lower economic status were feeling more and more ignored by those in power. As a form of protest, some sprayed messages or pictures in public places. Graffiti writers developed their own tags, personal designs that were representative of an artist. Graffiti artists began to spray graffiti on any available external public surfaces, walls, subway trains, and even dumpsters. Certain sectors of New York City in particular had widespread graffiti, and it continued to increase, which, unsurprisingly, coincided with social protest at the time. This graffiti was not at all uniform. Some tags were just the initials of the writers, while other forms of graffiti were complex pictures. Although some New Yorkers felt that previously ugly walls had been converted to artwork, the New York City government declared war on graffiti. It considered graffiti the destruction of public property and a crime. The city increased funds allocated to police targeting to stop graffiti, and arrests began. In 1 year alone, there were over 2,400 arrests for graffiti-related crimes. New York City then set to work to restore many of its public surfaces to their original unmarked state. Nonetheless, there remained an appreciation for the artistic qualities of certain kinds of graffiti. Businesses began to commission their own graffiti to beautify the walls of their buildings. Some of the more famous graffiti artists even started their own art galleries. This led to the idea that not all forms of graffiti were destructive. The orientation of the art community then shifted toward recognition of the qualitative artistic value of certain works of street art. The idea of graffiti as art, however, was still not widely accepted, and the art form remained outside the mainstream, that is, until the appearance of the mysterious graffiti artist Banksy. Banksy is a secretive graffiti artist from the UK, whose graffiti art started appearing in the late 1990s. Banksy takes great care to hide his identity. His graffiti usually involves humorous pictures with anti-authority slogans. He frequently creates large pieces of graffiti and sometimes even full art installations. For instance, one piece of work involved a live painted elephant. Banksy likes to take risks in order to draw attention to his ideas and work. In one set of schemes, Banksy snuck into world-famous museums and galleries and hung up his own artwork next to that of the masters. In many of these places, his edition was not discovered until days later. Banksy somehow managed to do all this without getting caught by the police. In time, his actions attracted the attention of the news and the general public. A transformation of graffiti as subculture art into mainstream art began, and Banksy's art in particular was held up as a leading example. While still creating his secretive street art, he also started to sell his works through a gallery. His artwork was quickly bought up. Famous actors and musicians became interested in collecting his work. By the 2010s, his work was being sold at Sotheby's and Bonhams, world-famous art auction houses, and one wall panel of his work sold for over £185,000, about $240,000. Since his first works went on auction, Banksy and his art have only become more popular, more expensive, and more a part of public awareness. One of his latest works sold for $605,000. He has gone on to make a movie about street art, Exit Through the Gift Shop, which was shortlisted for an Oscar. In what seems like a contradiction, his street art is now exhibited officially in well-known museums around the world. But not only is Banksy's street art being exhibited at these places, Banksy has also succeeded in bringing attention and recognition to graffiti art as a whole. Thanks to Banksy, ideas about what is or is not art have been revised, and this outsider art form has been brought inside today's galleries and museums.
Business. Unit 15. The Internet for business or pleasure. Employee Internet Management. When the Internet was invented, it was created for the purpose of defense during times of war. It was not until the late 1980s and 1990s that the Internet became available for use by the general public. Since then, Internet technology has increased rapidly, and the uses for the Internet have become widespread and extensive. People can now do almost anything from the comfort of their own homes. No longer do they need to go to the post office to mail a letter or go to the mall to buy clothes. People do not even have to go to the movie theater to watch a movie anymore. The internet has made everything so fast and convenient that it may be hard for people to imagine life without the internet. The internet has also allowed companies and employees to be more efficient. Employees no longer have to pick up the phone and wait on hold to relay a message. Managers can email or chat with a group of employees all at once without having to call a meeting or be in the same room. Employees can now even have a face-to-face business meeting with someone across the country without having to get on an airplane. Despite all the benefits and conveniences of the internet, it can also be the cause of a lack of productivity, especially for employees in the corporate workplace. In the past, besides a coffee break chat with a colleague or break for lunch, there wasn't too much for an employee to be distracted by or do other than work. These days, whether it be a beep indicating that a friend has liked a photo, an email reminder to pay a bill, or a text from a family member, employees are constantly distracted. Not only that, but if an employee is bored or just doesn't want to work, he or she may have an inclination to play games on the internet, shop online, watch a movie or video clip, or surf through social networking sites instead. This has become a growing problem within companies and workplaces. In fact, studies show that employees spend 30 to 40% of their time at work doing other things besides work. Essentially, employees are only working 4 to 5 hours a day while being paid for working 8 hours. This has cost companies billions of dollars annually in lost productivity. So how can companies maximize employee work productivity without abandoning the internet altogether? One prime solution is Employee Internet Management, EIM software. Much more advanced than simple blocking software, EIM software is a refined tool whereby companies can monitor or restrict employees' internet access. For example, Work Examiner is a good software program for companies that want to have significant control over how their employees use the internet during work hours. It allows companies to block sites completely or limit sites for a certain time or during a certain part of the day. Managers can record employees' keystrokes, view their communications with others, and capture images of their computer screens. For companies that want to be aware of how employees are using the internet but do not want to prevent internet access, NetSpy Pro is a software program that only monitors what sites employees are visiting. In this way, employees have more freedom while the company is informed of internet usage and can act when needed. With these types of software programs already on the market, a survey showed that 66% of workplaces currently monitor internet usage. Of those companies, about 30% said that they had terminated employees based on violations of the company's internet policies. While the advantages of EIM software are obvious, there are also disadvantages as well. Though EIM software may increase employee productivity, some employees may feel a company that monitors too much or restricts internet usage is too controlling. In addition, some employees may not appreciate the lack of privacy if a company can see every site viewed and every word that is communicated through email or chat. In particular, younger employees who have never known a world without internet or social media may find such practices overbearing. In the end, a company's established protocol for internet usage can determine the culture of the workplace. Thus, companies need to determine the balance between monitoring and privacy, as well as between internet restrictions and freedom that works best for the company and its employees. Then, policies that clearly state the company's expectations for internet usage and the consequences of internet misuse should be communicated to all employees, thereby ensuring employees are aware of and can follow the company's code of behavior. Business. Unit 16. To study business or economics. The right degree for the right path. For college students, business degrees and economics degrees are very popular both domestically and overseas. However, to most, a business degree and an economics degree sound like they might be similar or the same thing. So it can be hard for potential college students to differentiate between the two degrees. Although both degrees lead to a broad range of careers that can overlap, the path taken to reach that point can look entirely different depending on which degree is pursued. First, what are they? Business administration is the study of how to operate and manage a business so that a company can reach its goals successfully. On the other hand, economics is a social science within the School of Liberal Arts. It is the study of how goods and resources are made, traded, and used. It involves studying economic theory and models related to different theories. Which skills are taught in these different majors? Business classes will focus on accounting, marketing, and management. However, much of a business degree involves developing soft skills such as leadership, communication, organization, and social skills. Most times, these skills cannot be taught or learned through a textbook as with other subjects. Instead, these are skills that are developed through practice. Therefore, the bulk of a business degree will include assignments that involve cooperative tasks and projects, looking at case studies, and presenting in front of peers. Someone who is looking for hands-on experience, enjoys working with people, is detail-oriented, flexible, and has excellent communication skills would be a good candidate for a business degree. On the contrary, much of an economics degree is learning hard skills, such as analyzing data using mathematical formulae, predicting trends, and proposing solutions. Therefore, a student majoring in economics will primarily sit through lectures and seminars. Someone who is research-oriented and enjoys math and statistics would be geared more towards an economics degree. What are some common careers for graduates in each major? A job directly connected with a business degree would be project manager. Project managers are needed in many fields, such as IT, construction, and engineering, to name a few. The principal responsibility would be organizing, planning, and allocating tasks and resources to team members to complete projects on time within a given budget. Other jobs available to business degree holders are payroll director, human resources manager, data administrator, health services administrator, and sales manager. For economics graduates, a common job is market research analyst. These analysts design studies and analyze the data to look at what consumers buy and why. The results of this market research help companies make decisions on which products will generate the most revenue, how to price those products, and which consumers to target with marketing. Other jobs for economics degree holders include financial analyst, auditor, contract specialist, and tax economist. Depending on the knowledge and skills acquired, both business and economic degrees can also lead to jobs as an accountant or consultant as well. Does either degree have an advantage in the job market? Some might argue that a business degree can offer a wider range of options in the job market since many companies have the need for students that hold a business degree. In addition, a student with a business degree will have also practiced many of the soft skills of leadership and communication, which are important skills for most jobs. On the other hand, some would say that economics is a more flexible degree, with connections to other fields such as math, psychology, sociology, philosophy, and political science. Someone with an economics degree will also have the skills needed to think logically, assess data, and draw conclusions, all important for most jobs as well. Thus, neither degree seems to have an overwhelming advantage for students in the job market. In the end, business and economics degrees share many elements. Students of each degree program must learn some aspects of the other. Therefore, the decision about which major to choose should be based on the student's own interests, ultimate career goal, and the skills he or she already has and would like to obtain.